Uh, let me just see if I can move it. Okay. Uh, in when they managed to take over, right? In 1922, guess what happened? 1922. Uh, the British South Africa administration, BSA, these guys who came in, those goons, those soldiers, their rule ended, and then the white minority then formed the self-government. So BSAC was no longer there. So the white minority then formed the government. Okay? And then remember, I say to you that when they were coming from South Africa, there was an idea that when they get to Zimbabwe, they will find the second rand, they will find gold. But what happened is that when they got to Zimbabwe, they didn't find the gold. So then the mission had to change. So the mission then changed from finding gold to now getting the land. So the most productive land, they began taking it. Like what happened here? They took all the land. Yeah. Yes, and they moved us all out. Harare, like what I'm saying, Harare is where they landed. The pioneer column that was coming from here. That's where they landed. And these are the provinces that we have in Zimbabwe. There are 10 provinces that are there. So you find that there are high rainfall areas, especially in Harare, Manicaland, and somewhere here, and Machimbo and all that. So all the other people were just pushed out to sandy areas, sandy places, right? Because that's where they were supposed to go. And the white minority took all the land. And what they started doing was that they were now urbanizing everything. Everything was being modernized. But we're still holding on to our life. We're still holding on to our life, remember, this life. So they had to do something to break our life. So what they did was that they passed what I would call in 1930 Land Apportionment Act. So the Land Apportionment Act was then now they were putting everything into law and taking off the land from all the black people and pushing them out to unproductive land. By so doing, they were creating a labor force for themselves. And there's one thing that I also want to tell people that will live here is that back in Zimbabwe, you don't have one home, you've got two homes. The two homes came out of this Land Apportionment Act, whereby we were pushed out to the unfertile land, right? When we were pushed to the unfertile land, the fertile land and the land that is very important remained with the white minority. And the white minority then builds cities. And when they built cities, what they did was that they then built hostels and places for people to stay. So you would live in the tribal trust land, but only the one who's able-bodied is allowed to come into the urban areas to work. So what people would do, they would come and work, and then at the weekend or holidays, they would go back to their families in the rural areas. So people have got two homes. But, yeah.
I have a question. Because this was going on all over South Africa, not just in Zimbabwe, right?
Well, I said they came to
Okay.
That's the modus operandi.
Got it.
And the same thing that was happening, remember, is also happening all over the world. And I'll come to something that is very important, is that there's something that happened the world over in 1963. Something happened here. The world over. What happened the world over 1963? Students of history.
Well, there was the Cuban Missile Crisis.
The movement.
And then conscientization. Of everyone. we have in Africa, we call it Black Conscious Movement, BCM. People were being conscientized about oppression and taking up arms and rising up against the oppressors. Okay, and then out of that, what happened? This is very, very interesting. I think I'll cut some of the stuff so that I'll be within time. 1964. Remember, these guys had declared the land and taken it for the queen, right? But now what they did was that they were paying obeisance to the queen. The land belonged to the queen. Everything was linked to the queen. But what they did was that and remember, I didn't tell you that the country was called Rhodesia after Rhodes.
Right.
So there was a party called the Rhodesia Front. It came into power in 1964. Then immediately in 1965, they did what we call in my country UDI, which is the Unilateral Declaration of Independence, cutting themselves off from the Queen, all the obligations, all the things, the treaties, and whatever you. They cut themselves off from that. Right?
What was the first word?
Unilateral Declaration of Independence. Okay? So when they did that, then the African people, my people, had to resort to what we call the guerrilla war. And this time around, let's see if I can get to that. Oh, this is very important. When the missionaries came to Africa, they had the Bible, we had the land. They said, let us pray. We closed our eyes. When we opened them, we had the Bible and they had the land. It's the same thing also with Chief Pontiac. It was happening the world over. Here, I think you've done that, I think, in this class. This is what I want to get into. 1966 to 1979. Remember, these guys had ASEA guys and arrows and all that, whatever. But when it came to the 1966 to 1979, they balanced out everything. Because Russia was also involved in this. China was also involved. People were getting trained. Look at the AK-47, which they had. And they waged a brutal war. Right. Which culminated to 1980. Right. So 1980, this is where we get our independence. Independence of Zimbabwe. Right. On the right, so that I can finish this. Right. But what we had, what was called the Lancaster House Conference, where we came up with that constitution that is flawed. Right. And then later on, what we had to do, what we had to do, this is independence, is that in 2000, in the year 2000, we had to have the land invasion, if you've heard about them. South Africa is having them right now, where we took back our land. And things have never been the same ever since. That's our independence. The Union Jack came down. All right. This is where I want to get to. Finally. You asked me about the marriage. What do you see there? This is our, you're having a fight here, which is very important. That's our Supreme Court. And also acts as our constitutional court. What do you see? Tell me something that you see.
Look, English.
Women, black,
White women.
Regalia.
They're wearing clericals.
And that's colonial, right?
Yeah, but that's
So we were influenced by this colonial thing. It got to us. It changed us as a people. It changed us, our religion. It changed us in everything that we do. And this one, what do you see? This is my former 93-year-old president. Opening of the parliament. What do you see? Pageantry, right?
Yeah.
This is what British pageantry. This is a Rolls Royce. all that. Okay. That's okay. That's fine. That's fine. I was coming to an end anyway. So, why I want to get to that is that the effect that these people have, although we have this and we tried as much as possible to go against them, we're still stuck with it. Look at what we turned out to be and what we are doing. And so what happened now is that it changed. Remember, we were saying salvation is equals to work. So when that happens is that what we get now is that we get closer to this
Right.
more individual. So the individual is what who knows what that means? Cogito some. I think therefore I am. So we have moved from this. We are more like that.
What was the first thing you pointed to?
What's that? Oh, the first thing that I pointed, we moved from this.
I am because we are.
To
Regard.
I think
Therefore I am.
therefore I am. Remember, I said salvation is by work. So our worth now is no longer of that of a human being. We are now back. We are now more of the individual by productivity, right? Is now what is measuring our worth. Sorry. And then what happens is that this thing has changed now because of what I've shown you. There is the governance now changes. Okay? So this, the local council, I showed you the province. Okay? And provincial, and then national. So what has happened now is that at the local level, the individual, when there are problems, you have to go to the magistrate. At the provincial level, you have to go to the High Court. And then you go to the Supreme Court.
No longer handled by the family and the clan and the tribe.
So that is changed and given way to that. Right? And then, but since we still want to keep our polygamous and all that and whatever, we're coming to the one that I told you about. So, we do not recognize same-sex marriage. That's what we are. So, I'll give you this as is. So this one is one man, right? It's within the Constitution. And then this, this one, you can, it's one man. So, you marry wife number one, you call it wife number one. You marry wife number two, number 3, number 4, number 5. It's all recognized within the law. And also what has happened is that because we were also influenced by the missionaries and all that and what have you, many of our cultures have changed, even to the extent that even marriage, when it comes to marriage, we were doing an analysis and we were laughing at it. Because you all know that the white wedding was instituted by somebody else, right? It's not something that is religious and all that. So what we ended up having in trying to merge the cultures and what we have is that we ended up having, we were laughing with some of my friends, that we have, instead of 1, instead of 2, instead of 3, instead of 4, we've got 5 marriages that we make our young people undergo. Because you want to say something?
Oh, I just had a question.
Okay. Well, can I finish this?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So the first thing that happens is that we have this, you know, the betrothal You know, Joseph was married to Mary and all that. You're betrothed and you exchange clothing and all that, right? But then, because of this culture that came through, there is also the engagement, where you have to give the engagement ring, right? But then we still have where you have to pay the dowry. Okay? But at this level, in this culture, it's recognized as marriage. But then you have to have the white wedding where you go to the priest. But even after the priest has done the wedding in our culture, you are also supposed to do the unveiling. You know the unveiling that I was talking about. Cover yourself and unveil yourself and come into that. We call it unveiling or giving water. The one that I said my wife did. So the priest would say, I now pronounce you husband and wife, or whatever you. But still afterwards they separate them, and then in the middle of the night they have to come together and do that. So yeah, we have so many things have changed because we have taken this into us and our thinking has changed. But we still have our Ubuntu. We still have. Yeah, question? Question?
Okay, so my question before was, so it's specifically only one man with multiple wives in Zimbabwe because of the patriarchal culture. Because I know now even in certain areas of Africa, there's one woman with multiple husbands that's become legalized again.
Polyandry, we do not have polyandry. The reason being that, like I said, still remember I talked about title.
Mm-hmm.
Title in my country belongs to the male. So if title is to the male, if you want to survive, or if you want land and all that, you have to be under a male. But in other places where title is to the female, for survival, sake and all that, you can do polyandry.
What year was the Lakado uprising? Yeah, somewhere between 1897 1922. The first uprising, they had the spears.
The first uprising is the year 1896 to 1897. This is the first one. The first, we call them Chimurenga, which is war. So this is the first Chimurenga. First Chimurenga. And this is the second Chimurenga. This one, the Gorilla War is the second Chimurenga. And then we have also called this, where in 2000, where we took our land, the third Chimurenga as well.
The laptop will work if you want to log that in.
Oh, okay. I think I done it.
Monte, before you finish, can you also talk a little about your own work in theology? Whether, to what extent, your theology and what you're trying to accomplish in the present and the future is reflective of this history that you have been delineating. And by the way, what's on the board, it's a work of art here.
Yeah. Yes.
So I'm into this because that's where I'm mostly interested in, because I'm into family and youth ministry and I work with young people. And these are some of the things that we were trying to work at. Because this is very expensive for young people when they get married, because everything involves money. To the extent that some young people do not want to get married, they rather elope and all that. So what we're trying to do is like to try and merge everything into one, or let it end here, so that when you pay the dowry and all that, if I am a priest, I am there and I bless that. So my interest is mostly with young people. It's human development and leadership. So what I look at is that leadership and human development is embodied and contextual. So the context which you are within determines who you become. Martin Luther King Jr., he had civil rights and all that. It made him to become a leader who he is because it was within that context. my 93-year-old former president, he became the leader who he is because we are under operation and we led the war and all that. So that's my thing. But my lens that I use is psychodynamics. So my main thing is pastoral psychology. So I use mostly psychology to understand. That's why I'm giving some of these things. And one of the classes that we did with Dr. So is critical social theory. Very important. Some of the things that we're saying and we're doing come from that. So if you do critical social theory, sometimes it allows you to understand some of these things and to explain them.
Well, I know even like when you say you were cut off from your name, the names that you changed, things like that. They still do that even over here. Gangs do it.
Mm-hmm.
See, your name takes you back to who you really are.
Mm-hmm.
But if I can get you to get your name changed, I cut you off from your family.
Mm-hmm.
I cut you off from your history.
Mm-hmm.
I cut you off from all of that.
Yeah. Or if you do that critical social theory within, you have to do like the taboos and all that, whatever, cleanliness and all that. It's also involved in some of these things that we have. So like there's something that is taboo, and when we get together, especially if we think that this institution is under attack, we sometimes close in.
Okay.
And if it's within our system, we know the system of the scapegoat. We find the scapegoat, expel the scapegoat, and when we cleanse ourselves of the scapegoat, everyone is happy, and we come back, and we're okay.
Okay, Monte, thank you so much. Just because of the simplicity of the time, we have to stop. But once again, this has been a very enriching, wonderful lecture.
Took 3 hours.
That you gave us.
Okay.
Thanks.
Excellent presentation. Thank you.
Yeah.